Imagine being 16 and rising to unimaginable fame, and at your peak just a couple years later, being accused of a gruesome murder. Hi there, and welcome to the Sleepy Documentarian. This is where we take true stories and retell them softly. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from, and what hour has managed to find you tonight. It's a quiet comfort, imagining this channel as a constellation of listeners scattered across the globe. Whether you're winding down after a long day, getting comfortable in bed, or just looking for a quiet corner of the internet to relax, you found the right place. Tonight's story is complicated. It's about a kid who recorded songs in his sister's closet and became famous before he could legally buy a drink. It's about how fast things can move when the internet decides it likes you. And it's about what happens when something terrible intersects with someone's life in a way that doesn't make sense yet, and might not for a long time. His name is David. You might know his music. You definitely know the questions people have been asking about him since September. David Burke was born in Queens in 2005. March 28th to be specific. Queens is one of those places where everyone comes from somewhere else. It's loud and crowded, and full of different languages and cultures all mixed together. But for David, growing up there was quiet in a way that might surprise you. His family was deeply religious, Christian specifically, and the kind of Christian household where music wasn't just background noise or entertainment. It was worship. The only music allowed in the house was gospel. Nothing from the radio, nothing secular. No hip-hop, no pop, no rock, just hymns and gospel songs, and music that pointed toward God. For a kid growing up in New York in the 2000s and 2010s, that's an unusual childhood. While other kids his age were discovering Drake or Kanye, or whatever was trending on YouTube, David was singing in church. He didn't know what he was missing because he'd never been exposed to it. His world was small in that specific way. When you grow up like that, sound becomes something different. You learn to hear music as structure. Gospel music has patterns, call and response, repetition, emotion that builds and releases. David absorbed all of that without realizing it would matter later. When he was 13, everything changed. His family moved to Houston, Texas. Different city, different environment, and suddenly, different rules. In Houston, David started hearing music he'd never heard before. Rap, pop R&B, all the stuff that had been filtered out of his life up until that point, and it opened something in him. It wasn't that gospel music was bad or that he rejected it. It was just that suddenly, he understood there was a whole other vocabulary for expressing feelings, a whole other way to talk about pain and love and confusion, and all the things teenagers feel. He started listening to everything. He'd catch up on years of music in a few months. Artists his peers had grown up with became new discoveries for him, and because he came to it late, he heard it differently. He didn't have the same associations or memories tied to these songs. They were just pure sound and emotion. But music was still just something he listened to. It wasn't something he thought he could make. What David really loved was gaming, specifically Fortnite. If you're not familiar with Fortnite, or if you only know it as that game kids play, let me give you some context. Fortnite exploded in 2017 and 2018. It became a cultural phenomenon. It wasn't just a game, it was a social space, a place where millions of teenagers and young adults gathered, competed, built things, and most importantly, performed. David was good at it. Not professional level good, but good enough that people noticed. He joined an esports team called Team Limit as a content creator. His job wasn't to compete in tournaments. It was to create content around the game. And the way you did that in 2019 and 2020 was by making montage videos. Montage videos are basically highlight reels set to music. You'd record your best gameplay moments, the kills, the victories, the dramatic escapes, and then edit them together with a soundtrack that made everything feel epic and cinematic. These videos were huge on YouTube. Some of them got millions of views. David started making his own. He'd spend hours editing footage, syncing kills to beat drops, making sure everything flowed, and people watched. Not millions, but thousands, enough to feel like he was building something, enough to feel like maybe this could be more than just a hobby. Then he hit a wall. The music he was using in his videos kept getting copyright strikes. YouTube's algorithm would flag the songs, and his videos would get taken down or demonetized. It was frustrating. He'd spend all this time creating something, and then it would disappear because of a 30-second clip of someone else's song. He complained to his mother about it, told her how unfair it was, how he couldn't make videos without music, but he couldn't use music without getting in trouble. And she said something that changed his life. Make your own music. It's one of those pieces of advice that sounds obvious after the fact, but in the moment, it must have felt impossible. David didn't play an instrument. He'd never written a song. He had no training beyond singing in church choir. But he also didn't have any other options. So he started experimenting. He didn't have a studio. He didn't have a computer with production software. He didn't even have a microphone. What he had was an iPhone and a basic recording app. And he had his little sister's bedroom closet, which became his makeshift studio, because the small space dampened the sound and made his voice sound less echoey. Think about that for a second. One of the biggest breakout artists of 2022 and 2023 started by recording songs in a closet, using a phone. No fancy equipment, no producers, no connections in the music industry, just a kid with an idea and a phone. The songs he made were raw, lo-fi. You could hear the limitations of the recording setup, but that rawness became part of the appeal. In a music landscape full of overproduced, polished tracks, David's songs felt honest. They felt like someone's actual bedroom recordings, because that's exactly what they were. He started uploading them to TikTok in 2021, and this is where the story becomes a very 2020s kind of success story. TikTok in 2021 was a different place than it is now. It was still relatively new as a platform, and it had this strange alchemy where the algorithm could take someone completely unknown and make them famous overnight. You didn't need followers. You didn't need a marketing team. You just needed to make something that resonated with people. David's songs resonated. They were about heartbreak, mostly, about feeling betrayed, about the specific kind of pain that comes from trusting someone and having that trust broken. These are universal feelings, but the way David expressed them felt specific, personal, like he was writing in a diary, not trying to craft a hit single. The songs started getting shared, first dozens of times, then hundreds, then thousands. People would use his music in their own TikTok videos. They'd lip-sync to it, or use it as background for their own stories about heartbreak. And every time someone used his song, it exposed his music to more people. In July 2022, he released a song called Romantic Homicide. The title alone is perfect. It's dramatic and teenage, and a little bit darkly funny. It captures that feeling of a breakup, being so devastating, it feels like a crime. Like something died. The song itself is grungy. The production is intentionally lo-fi. David's voice is raw, almost fragile in places, but it builds to this emotional climax that lands hard. The lyrics are about someone who gave everything to a relationship and got nothing back. Someone who feels stupid for trusting. Someone who's angry and hurt and doesn't know how to process it except through music. He made a music video for it. Homemade, like everything else he did. Just David and a camera and some moody lighting. Nothing fancy. But it worked. The video went viral. Not just TikTok viral. Actually viral. Tens of millions of views across platforms. The song started appearing on Spotify playlists. Radio stations started playing it. Music blogs started writing about this mysterious teenager making bedroom pop on his iPhone. By the end of 2022, David Burke, now performing under the name D4vd, pronounced David, had signed with Darkroom and Interscope Records. These are major labels. The thing about sudden fame is that it doesn't come with an instruction manual. One day you're a teenager making songs in your sister's closet because you need background music for Fortnite videos. The next day, you're signing contracts with major labels and doing interviews with music magazines. David handled it the way most people his age would. He kept making music. He tried to stay focused on the creative part and let other people handle the business part. Critics started paying attention. They didn't quite know how to categorize him. His music pulled from alternative indie rock, but also from dreamy R&B and lo-fi pop. It had elements of bedroom pop and emo, and even some gospel influences if you listened closely. Some people called it Gen Z heartbreak music. Others called it TikTok indie. GQ ran a profile in June 2023 with the headline, "How Singer-Songwriter D4vd became the mouthpiece for Gen Z heartache." That's a lot of pressure to put on a teenager, but it was accurate in a way. His music spoke to a specific moment, a specific feeling that a lot of young people were experiencing, but didn't have words for. He released 2 EPs in 2023. The first was called Petals to Thorns, and it came out in May. The second was The Lost Petals, released in September. Both were well received. Both showed that romantic homicide wasn't a fluke. David could write songs that connected with people consistently. The EPs also showed his range. Some songs were more upbeat. Some were more experimental. Some leaned into the lo-fi aesthetic, while others had fuller production, now that he had access to real studios and producers. But they all maintained that core emotional honesty that made his music feel different from the polished pop dominating the charts. By early 2024, David was no longer just a TikTok sensation. He was a legitimate artist with a growing fan base and a career that looked like it had real staying power. He was writing constantly, recording, collaborating with other artists, doing the work of turning viral fame into something sustainable. In April 2025, he released his debut full-length album. It was called Withered. The title is interesting. Withered implies something that used to be alive but has faded, something that's lost its vitality. It's a melancholy word, which fits David's aesthetic perfectly. The album explored themes of decay and loss, and the way relationships fall apart slowly, like a plant dying from lack of water. Withered debuted at number 13 on the Billboard 200 chart. That's significant. The Billboard 200 ranks the most popular albums in the United States across all genres. Getting into the top 20 means you're competing with everyone: pop stars, rappers, rock bands, country artists, everyone. For a 20-year-old who'd been famous for less than 3 years, it was a major accomplishment. The album also racked up over 500 million streams on Spotify within a few months. 500 million plays. That's the kind of number that would have been unimaginable in the CD era. But in the streaming age, it's how we measure success. The response to Withered was strong. Fans connected with it the same way they'd connected with his earlier work. Critics generally liked it, though some noted that he was still developing as an artist, still figuring out his sound. But that was part of the appeal. You could hear him growing in real time. Off the back of the album's success, D4vd announced his first world tour. Not just a few cities, not just the United States, a full world tour with dates across North America, Europe, and other continents. It was scheduled to run through the summer and fall of 2025. For someone who'd started making music just 4 years earlier, to kill time between Fortnite matches, this was surreal. He was going to perform in front of thousands of people, in different countries, in venues that held actual crowds, not just bedroom walls. The tour started in mid-2025. David traveled from city to city, performing the song, and then, in early September 2025, something came full circle. Epic Games, the company that makes Fortnite, announced that David had written an official anthem for the game. It was called Locked and Loaded, and it was the first time Fortnite had ever commissioned an original song specifically for the game. Think about what that meant for David. He'd started this entire journey making Fortnite montage videos. The game had been his entry point into content creation, which led to music, which led to everything else. And now, years later, the game was commissioning him to write music for them. He did an interview with Variety about it. He called it a full circle moment, which is probably the understatement of his career. It was validation in a way that chart positions and streaming numbers couldn't provide. It meant that the thing that started it all recognized him as an artist worth collaborating with. The interview ran on September 7th, 2025. David's 20th birthday was coming up in a few months. He was on tour. His album was doing well. He'd just achieved this dream collaboration with Fortnite. Everything was going right. That interview was posted on a Saturday. Sunday morning, everything changed. September 8th, 2025. Hollywood, California. A tow yard in an industrial part of the city, where impounded vehicles get stored until their owners claim them, or they get sold off. An employee was doing their morning rounds, walking between rows of cars, checking paperwork, making sure everything was secure. Then they walked past a Tesla. Black. Texas license plates. It had been impounded a few days earlier for violating parking ordinances, and they smelled something. If you've never smelled decomposition, it's hard to describe. It's not like any other smell. It's thick and sweet and chemical and biological all at once. It gets in your nose and your throat. It's the kind of smell that makes you know immediately that something is very, very wrong. The employee called the police. APD officers arrived and examined the vehicle from the outside. The smell was strongest near the front of the car. The body was severely decomposed. That's the phrase that appeared in every news report. Severely decomposed. It means the body had been dead for a significant amount of time, long enough that soft tissues had started breaking down, long enough that identification wasn't immediately possible just by looking. The police closed off the tow yard. This was now a crime scene, or at least a death investigation scene. They documented everything. Photographed the car, photographed the bag, took samples, started the process of trying to figure out who this person was and how they'd ended up in the trunk of a Tesla in a Hollywood tow yard. The Tesla was registered to David A. Burke. Texas plates. The same David Burke who performed as D4vd. The same person who'd just done an interview with Variety the day before about writing a song for Fortnite. The car had been sitting on Bluebird Avenue in the Hollywood Hills for weeks. Maybe longer. Neighbors had complained about it. Eventually, it got ticketed. Eventually, it got towed. And in all that time, no one had reported it stolen. No one had called the police about a missing car. It had just sat there, parked on a residential street, with a body decomposing inside it. Let me walk you through the timeline more carefully, because every detail matters in a case like this. August 27th, 2025. A parking enforcement officer in the Hollywood Hills noticed the Tesla parked on Bluebird Avenue. This is a residential area. Nice houses, quiet streets, the kind of neighborhood where an unfamiliar car stands out. The officer marked the tires with chalk. This is standard procedure in Los Angeles. When a car is parked on a public street for an extended time, parking enforcement marks the tires to see if it moves. If the chalk mark is still in the same position days later, it means the car hasn't moved, and it can be cited for violating parking ordinances. The Tesla didn't move. September 3rd, 2025. 6 days after the tires were marked, the car was still there. The chalk was still in the same position. The parking officer wrote a ticket. In Los Angeles, you can't park in one spot on a public street for more than 72 hours. It's meant to prevent abandoned vehicles from cluttering up neighborhoods. The ticket was placed on the windshield. Still, no one came to move the car. Neighbors later told reporters they thought the Tesla had been sitting there for much longer than 6 days. Some said it had been there for over a month. They'd noticed it because it was unfamiliar, because it had Texas plates in a California neighborhood, because it just sat there, day after day, never moving. September 5th, 2025. The city declared the vehicle abandoned and had it towed. This is 2 days after the ticket was issued. The Tesla was taken to an impound lot in Hollywood and placed in storage. At this point, if David or anyone associated with him had reported the car stolen, there would have been a record. But there was no report. As far as the system was concerned, this was just another abandoned vehicle that would eventually be auctioned off if the owner didn't claim it. September 8th, 2025. The tow yard employee smelled the decomposition. Police were called. The body was discovered 3 days after the car was impounded, but likely weeks after the body had been placed inside it. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office took possession of the remains. Their job was to determine who this person was, how they died, and when they died. But the state of decomposition made all of those questions difficult to answer. They used forensic methods, dental records, DNA, whatever they could to make an identification. It took about a week. The victim was Celeste Rivas Hernandez. She was 15 years old. Her birthday had been September 7th. The day before her body was discovered, she turned 15 in a duffel bag in the trunk of a car. Celeste had been reported missing from Lake Elsinore, California, on April 5, 2024. She was 13 years old then. Lake Elsinore is about an hour and a half southeast of Los Angeles. A smaller city, the kind of place where everyone knows when a teenager goes missing. According to reports, Celeste had gone missing multiple times in 2024. She'd run away or disappeared, and then come back home. Then she'd leave again. It's a pattern that happens sometimes with troubled teenagers, kids who are dealing with things at home or at school, kids who are trying to escape something but don't have anywhere safe to escape to. This time, she didn't come back. The medical examiner's office listed her official date of death as September 8, 2025. That's standard procedure when remains are discovered. The date of death is listed as the date they're found, unless there's clear evidence of a different date. But they also noted in their report that Celeste had likely been dead for weeks, possibly longer, before her body was discovered. The level of decomposition suggested she'd been in that car for an extended period, through the heat of late August and early September in Los Angeles, inside a closed vehicle, in the sun. Because the remains were so decomposed, the medical examiner couldn't immediately determine the cause of death. There was no obvious trauma, no clear signs of violence or injury that would have been visible. They deferred the ruling, which means they needed more information. Toxicology tests, more detailed forensic analysis. Time. As of early October 2025, more than 3 weeks after Celeste's body was found, the medical examiner still hasn't announced a cause of death. The case is listed as deferred pending further investigation. That phrase is important. It means they're still working on it, still waiting for test results, still trying to understand what happened. The LAPD's Robbery Homicide Division took over the investigation. This is the division that handles high-profile cases, murders, celebrity deaths, cases that are complicated or sensitive. On September 16th, 8 days after the body was found, detectives executed a search warrant at a house in the Hollywood Hills. The house had been rented by D4vd and his team while he was in Los Angeles for work. It was close to where the Tesla had been abandoned, close enough to walk. Police went through the house. They seized electronics, computers, phones, hard drives, anything that might contain evidence. They took documents. They photographed everything. They treated it like any other crime scene, because at this point, they didn't know what they were dealing with. Was this a homicide? An accident? A suicide? Something else? They couldn't answer those questions yet, so they collected everything they could and waited for forensic analysis. According to the property's landlord, D4vd's manager, Josh Marshall, terminated the lease shortly after the police search. The team moved out, left Los Angeles. The house sat empty. So let's talk about what was known about David's connection to all of this. Because from the beginning, there's been confusion and speculation and a lot of unanswered questions. The facts. David Burke owned the Tesla. It was registered in his name with Texas plates. He'd been living in Los Angeles for part of 2025, renting that Hollywood Hills house while working on music and doing shows in the area. But here's the crucial detail. David wasn't in California when the body was likely placed in the car. He was on tour. He had concerts scheduled across the United States throughout late August and early September. Tour records show he performed in Boston, in Chicago, in Indianapolis, other cities far from California. These weren't small shows he could skip. These were ticketed events with hundreds or thousands of people attending. Venues have records, promoters have contracts. There's documentation of exactly where he was and when. On September 9th, the day after the body was discovered, David performed a scheduled show in Minneapolis. This was before the news broke widely, before most people knew anything had happened. He went on stage, performed his set, and left. By all accounts, it was a normal show. Then the news came out. The headlines started appearing. Body found in D4vd's Tesla. Missing teenager identified. Death investigation underway. And David's world collapsed. Law enforcement sources confirmed to various news outlets that they'd informed David about the discovery, that they'd told him his car had been found with a body inside, and according to those sources, he was unaware of anything untoward regarding his vehicle until that moment. Think about what that conversation must have been like. You're 20 years old, you're on tour, you're living the life you've dreamed about, and police call to tell you that your car, which you thought was parked safely somewhere in Los Angeles, had actually been abandoned on a residential street for weeks, and now there's a dead teenager inside it. How do you process that? What do you even say? David's representatives released a statement saying he was cooperating fully with authorities, that he'd been informed about what happened, that he was still on tour but would make himself available for any investigative needs. The LAPD confirmed this. They said David had been cooperative, that he'd made himself available for interviews, that he'd answered questions, that he wasn't refusing to help in any way. But the statement also said something else. David was not considered a suspect at this time. That phrase, "at this time," does a lot of work. It means he's not a suspect right now, but it doesn't mean he won't be later. It means investigators haven't found evidence linking him to Celeste's death, but they're still looking. David cancelled the rest of his tour. Shows in San Francisco, shows in Los Angeles, the European dates that were supposed to happen in October and November. All of it cancelled. A deluxe edition of Withered had been scheduled for release in mid-September. It was going to include new tracks, alternate versions, maybe some live recordings. Promotion for it was put on hold. The release was quietly pushed back indefinitely. David's last Instagram post had been on September 7th, his birthday. Well, technically the day before his birthday, but close enough. He'd announced the deluxe album, posted some photos from the tour, the usual stuff musicians post. After that, nothing. His account went silent. No statements, no explanations, no posts about the investigation, or Celeste, or anything else. Just silence. The internet, of course, did not stay silent. Within days of the news breaking, speculation exploded across social media. People started digging through David's old posts, through Celeste's social media accounts, which were still public, through anything they could find. Rumors started spreading, some of them based on misunderstandings, some of them based on nothing at all. One of the biggest rumors was that concerned adults had emailed David's manager, Josh Marshall, back in 2024, saying they believed Celeste was with David. The implication being that someone knew a 13-year-old runaway was in contact with a then 19-year-old musician, and that manager ignored it or covered it up. This rumor gained traction fast. People shared it on Twitter, on TikTok, on Reddit. It fit a certain narrative: famous musician, missing teenager, suspicious circumstances. It seemed to make sense in a horrible way. But in late September, Josh Marshall broke his silence to address this directly. Marshall posted comments on TikTok under his handle @JMOGUL. He said very clearly that he had zero knowledge of anything, that he'd never received an email about Celeste, that he doesn't even live in California. His work with David is mostly remote, managed from wherever Marshall happens to be at any given time. He also addressed another rumor that had been circulating, that he owned a second Tesla that might be connected to the case. Marshall said he doesn't own any cars in California, that this was completely false. The comments were verified as authentic by Los Angeles Magazine and People magazine. Multiple journalists confirmed they were really from Marshall, not from someone impersonating him. Marshall also expressed sympathy for Celeste's family. He said the whole situation was tragic, and he expressed frustration at how much misinformation was spreading. He asked people to please report on factual information instead of rumors and speculation. It was a rare moment of someone in David's circle speaking directly about the case, and it seemed to shut down at least some of the wilder theories. But it didn't answer the fundamental question. If David and his team didn't know anything about Celeste, how did her body end up in his car? Here's what the LAPD said publicly. On September 29th, 3 weeks after the body was discovered, they released an official update. The statement said that detectives from the Robbery Homicide Division had been diligently investigating the case, that they'd been working on it constantly since September 8th, that they were examining evidence, conducting interviews, and trying to piece together a timeline. They confirmed that Celeste may have been deceased for several weeks before her body was found. They said the cause and manner of death were still undetermined, pending toxicology and further forensic tests from the medical examiner's office. And then they said this: as such, it remains unclear whether there is any criminal culpability beyond the concealment of her body. That's a very careful sentence. Let me break down what it means. First, it remains unclear whether there is any criminal culpability. That means they don't know yet if anyone committed a crime that caused Celeste's death. They don't know if she was murdered, or if she died of natural causes, or an accidental overdose, or something else entirely. Second, beyond the concealment of her body. That phrase implies that concealing the body is definitely a crime. Someone put Celeste's body in that duffel bag. Someone put that bag in the Tesla. Someone left the car on a residential street and walked away. Those actions are crimes, regardless of how Celeste died. But they're less serious crimes than murder. So what the LAPD was saying, in careful legal language, is this: we know someone hid this girl's body. We don't know yet if that same person killed her, or if they were just covering up a death that happened some other way. Captain Scott Williams, speaking to reporters, put it even more plainly. We don't know for sure if anyone has any criminal culpability for her death, beyond the concealment of her dead body. As of early October 2025, no suspects have been arrested. No one has been charged with anything. The investigation is ongoing, which is police speak for "we're still working on it, and we can't tell you more right now." The LAPD has been waiting on results from the medical examiner. Toxicology tests can take weeks or even months. If Celeste had drugs in her system, those tests would reveal it. If there were any trace substances that might explain her death, those would show up too. They've also been analyzing evidence seized from the Hollywood Hills house: computers, phones, any digital communications that might explain how Celeste ended up in that car, who she was in contact with, where she was in the weeks before she died. They've been trying to retrace her movements. Celeste disappeared in April 2024. Her body was found in September 2025. That's 17 months. Where was she during that time? Who was she with? How did she survive? How did she end up in Los Angeles, in a car registered to a musician she may or may not have had any connection to? Those are all questions investigators are trying to answer. And so far, at least publicly, they don't have answers. Celeste's family buried her in late September. There were vigils in Lake Elsinore, her hometown. People who knew her or knew of her came out to hold candles and pray and remember a girl who'd been missing for over a year, and then was found in the worst possible way. Her family has been briefed by police, but they haven't made many public statements. What can you say in a situation like this? Your daughter disappeared when she was 13. You searched for her. You hoped she'd come home. And instead, more than a year later, you find out she's been dead for weeks. Her body hidden in a stranger's car, and no one can tell you how or why it happened. The community in Lake Elsinore is calling for justice, but justice is a complicated word when no one knows yet what crime was committed, if any, beyond the concealment of remains. So where does that leave D4vd? Legally, he's not a suspect. Police have been clear about that. But he's not exactly cleared either. He's in a strange limbo where his car was used in what might be a crime. But there's no evidence yet linking him personally to whatever happened to Celeste. He owns the car. That's not in dispute. But owning a car doesn't mean you're responsible for everything that happens in or around it. Cars get stolen. Cars get borrowed without permission. Cars get used by other people in ways the owner doesn't know about. David was on tour when the body was likely placed in the vehicle. There are receipts, tour dates, videos from performances, social media posts from fans who saw him in other cities. He has an alibi, in other words, for at least part of the relevant time period. But questions remain. Who had access to his car? Who knew where it was parked? If David was traveling for work, who was staying at the Hollywood Hills house? Were there other people around? Friends, staff, management? These are questions investigators are presumably asking, but they're not sharing the answers publicly. David himself hasn't made a direct public statement about any of this. Everything has come through his representatives or his lawyer. He's expressed condolences to Celeste's family through those channels. He's reiterated his cooperation with police, but he hasn't gone on camera or written a social media post in his own voice, explaining what he knows or doesn't know. Maybe his lawyers have advised him not to. That's common in cases like this. Even if you're innocent, saying the wrong thing can be used against you, can be taken out of context, can become evidence in ways you didn't intend. Or maybe he just doesn't know what to say. Maybe he's as confused and horrified by all of this as everyone else. Maybe his car really was stolen or used without his knowledge, and he's trying to process the fact that his property was involved in something terrible. Or maybe there's more to the story. Maybe there are details that will come out later that change how we understand everything. We don't know. And that's the frustrating part of a case like this. We're left with questions and timelines and police statements that raise more questions than they answer. Here's what we do know for certain. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 15 years old. She'd been missing since April 2024, when she was 13. She died sometime in the summer of 2025, weeks before her body was discovered on September 8th. Her remains were found in a Tesla registered to David Burke, also known as David, a musician who'd become famous making songs on his iPhone. The car had been abandoned on a Hollywood Hills street for weeks or possibly months. No one reported it stolen. Eventually it was towed. When it was sitting in an impound lot, an employee smelled decomposition and called police. The medical examiner still hasn't determined how Celeste died. Toxicology and forensic tests are pending. Police haven't classified this as a homicide. They haven't arrested anyone. They're still investigating. David Burke was not in California when the body was likely placed in his car. He was on tour in other states. He's been cooperative with investigators. He's not currently considered a suspect, but the investigation is ongoing. Those are the facts. Everything else is speculation, rumor, or information that hasn't been made public yet. This isn't a mystery with a clean resolution. It's not a story where I can tell you what happened and why and who was responsible. It's an active investigation into the death of a real person, and the answers are still being worked out in forensic labs and police interview rooms and evidence storage facilities across Los Angeles. What makes this case particularly difficult is how many unanswered questions there are, and not small questions, fundamental ones. How did Celeste die? Was it violence, an overdose, an accident, something medical that had nothing to do with another person? The medical examiner's office has her remains. They've had them for weeks now, and they still can't say definitively what killed her. That suggests either the decomposition was so advanced that evidence was destroyed, or that the cause of death is genuinely ambiguous. When did she die? The official date is September 8th, because that's when she was found, but investigators believe she'd been dead for weeks before that. How many weeks? 2, 4, 8? The timeline matters enormously, because it determines who could have been involved and when. Where'd she die? In the car? Somewhere else? If she died somewhere else and was then moved to the car, that changes everything. It means someone transported a body, made conscious decisions about concealment, planned, at least to some degree. Who put her in the car? This is maybe the most important question. Even if her death was accidental or natural, someone made the decision to hide her body in that duffel bag, place it in the Tesla, and abandon the vehicle. That person committed a crime. That person knows what happened. And perhaps most puzzling, why that car? Why a Tesla registered to a semi-famous musician with Texas plates, parked in the Hollywood Hills? Was it random? Was David targeted specifically? Was someone he knew involved? Or was the car simply available, and the person panicked and used whatever vehicle was accessible? Let's talk about the car itself for a moment, because it's central to everything. A Tesla is not an anonymous vehicle. It's expensive. It's distinctive. It has Tesla's logo on it. And this particular Tesla had Texas plates in California, which made it stand out even more in a Los Angeles neighborhood. If you were trying to dispose of a body and wanted to avoid detection, you probably wouldn't choose a distinctive vehicle in a residential area. You'd choose something common, something that blends in. You'd probably drive it somewhere remote, not park it on a street in the Hollywood Hills where neighbors would notice and complain. So either the person who put Celeste's body in the car wasn't thinking clearly, which is possible if they were panicking, or there's something about that specific car that mattered. Maybe it was accessible. Maybe they had keys. Maybe they knew David was out of town and the car would be sitting unused. Or maybe they wanted the car to be found. Maybe parking it in a residential area where it would eventually be ticketed and towed was part of the plan. Maybe they knew that once it was in a tow yard, someone would eventually discover the body. That seems unlikely, but investigators have to consider every possibility. There's also the question of Celeste herself. What was her life like in the months between her disappearance and her death? She was reported missing from Lake Elsinore in April 2024 at age 13. Reports indicate she'd gone missing multiple times that year, sometimes returning home. This suggests instability, maybe problems at home. Maybe she was running away from something. Maybe she was being lured away by something or someone. 13-year-olds who repeatedly run away often end up in dangerous situations. They're vulnerable. They need food and shelter and safety. And if they can't get those things from legitimate sources, they find them from illegitimate ones. Adults who exploit runaways. Other teenagers in similar situations. Street economies that trade safety for other things. Where was Celeste between April 2024 and summer 2025? That's more than a year. Was she in Los Angeles that whole time? Was she moving around? Was she with someone who was taking care of her, or someone who was exploiting her? Did she know David Burke? Had she ever met him? The rumors about Celeste being in contact with David or his team in 2024, the ones his manager, Josh Marshall, denied, are particularly important if true. If adults were concerned enough to reach out about a missing teenager and those concerns were ignored, that's a very different story than if this was a random crime involving a stolen or borrowed vehicle. But Marshall was emphatic in his denial. He said he never received any such email, that he had zero knowledge of Celeste before her body was found, and his comments were verified as authentic by multiple news outlets. So either he's telling the truth, and those rumors are false, or he's lying for some reason. There's no middle ground. If he's telling the truth, then the connection between Celeste and David's car remains unexplained. It becomes an even stranger mystery. How does a missing teenager from Lake Elsinore end up dead in a car owned by a musician she presumably had no connection to? If he's lying, then there's a much darker story here. One involving knowledge of a missing child, failure to report, possible exploitation, possible cover-up. But lying would be incredibly risky. It would be easy for investigators to subpoena email records and prove he was lying, and that would make everything worse for everyone involved. So the most likely scenario is that Marshall is telling the truth, which means the connection between Celeste and David's car is something else entirely. Let's consider some possibilities, understanding that all of this is speculation. Possibility 1. Someone stole or borrowed David's car without his knowledge. While he was on tour, someone who had access to his car, maybe someone who was staying at the Hollywood Hills house, maybe someone who knew where keys were kept, took the vehicle. This person was connected to Celeste in some way. When she died, they panicked and put her body in the car, then abandoned it. David knew nothing about any of this until police contacted him. This would explain why David was cooperative and why he's not considered a suspect. He'd genuinely be a victim in this scenario, his property used in a crime he had nothing to do with. Possibility 2, David's car was truly stolen, but not by someone he knew. A random theft. The thief then used the car for something involving Celeste. Maybe they knew her. Maybe they were responsible for her death. And when things went wrong, they abandoned the vehicle with her body inside. This seems less likely because there was no theft report. But maybe David was on tour and didn't notice the car was missing. Maybe he thought someone on his team had moved it or was using it. Maybe communication broke down. Possibility 3, someone close to David, not David himself, but someone in his circle, was involved with Celeste in some way. This person had legitimate access to David's car. When Celeste died, this person used the car to conceal her body. David didn't know, but his proximity to the crime makes him look suspicious, even though he's innocent. This would be the nightmare scenario for David. Not guilty of anything, but permanently associated with something horrible, because of his connection to whoever was actually responsible. Possibility 4. There's information we don't have yet that explains everything, and it's being kept quiet as part of the investigation. This is the most likely possibility, honestly. In any active investigation, police know far more than they share publicly. They hold back details deliberately, to protect the integrity of the case, to avoid tipping off potential suspects, to maintain leverage in interviews. So there may be evidence that explains the connection between Celeste and David's car, but investigators haven't released it because doing so would compromise their work. What's clear is that this case has had a massive impact on David's career and life. His tour is cancelled, his album promotion is on hold, his social media presence, which was a huge part of how he built his fan base, has gone silent. He's now associated in the public mind with a dead teenager, regardless of whether he had anything to do with it. That association will follow him forever, even if he's never charged with anything, even if it turns out he was completely innocent and his car was just used without his knowledge. The internet doesn't forget. Headlines don't disappear. If you search D4vd now, you don't just get his music. You get articles about Celeste, about the investigation, about the body found in his car. That's part of his story now, whether he wants it to be or not. For someone who's 20 years old, who built a career on being authentic and vulnerable and connecting with fans through emotional music, this has to be devastating. His entire brand was built on honesty, on being real. And now he's caught up in something where he can't be honest publicly, where anything he says could be used against him, where silence is the only safe option. There's also the question of what happens to his music now. Does he continue his career? Can he? Will fans still connect with songs about heartbreak and vulnerability when the person singing them is associated with an unexplained death? Will venues book him? Will festivals invite him? Will radio stations play his songs? These are practical questions with no easy answers. The music industry is fickle. Public perception matters. And right now, the public perception of D4vd is deeply uncertain. Some fans have stood by him. They post on social media defending him, saying he's innocent until proven guilty, saying the rush to judgment is unfair. They point out that he wasn't even in California when this happened, that he's cooperating with police, that there's no evidence linking him to Celeste's death. Other people are more skeptical. They ask why his car was involved if he had nothing to do with it. They question who had access to his vehicle. They wonder if he knows more than he's saying. And then there are people who've already decided he's guilty. Let's talk about Celeste for a moment. Because in all the discussion about David and his car and the investigation, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that a real person died. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 15 years old. She had a birthday on September 7th that she didn't get to celebrate. She had a family who loved her and searched for her and hoped she'd come home. She had a whole life ahead of her that she'll never get to live. She was also a troubled kid who ran away multiple times. who was missing for over a year, who ended up dead in circumstances that remain unclear. And that's tragic regardless of how it happened or who was responsible. There's a tendency in cases like this to either canonize the victim or to blame them, to either paint them as a perfect innocent or as someone who got what they deserved because they made bad choices. Celeste was neither. She was a teenager. Teenagers make mistakes. They trust the wrong people. They run away from problems instead of solving them. They end up in situations they don't know how to get out of. Whatever choices Celeste made, she didn't deserve to die. She didn't deserve to be hidden in a duffel bag in a car trunk. She didn't deserve to decompose for weeks while people drove past the vehicle without knowing she was inside. She deserved to be found when she first went missing. She deserved to be brought home safely. She deserved help and support and a chance to grow up. And she deserved better than to become a headline, a mystery, a detail in someone else's story. The investigation continues. As of early October 2025, the LAPD is still working the case. They're still waiting on forensic results, still interviewing people, still following leads. They've asked for the public's help. If anyone has information about Celeste's whereabouts in the months before her death, they want to hear about it. If anyone knows anything about how she ended up in that car, they need to come forward. The department has set up a tip line. They've promised confidentiality for people who don't want to be identified. They've said they're open to any information, no matter how small it might seem, because right now, they're working with fragments, a decomposed body, an abandoned car, a missing girl who was found too late, and a timeline that doesn't quite make sense yet. They need someone to connect the dots, someone who knows something they haven't shared yet, someone who saw something, or heard something, or knows something about where Celeste was and who she was with. Without that information, the case could remain unsolved indefinitely. The cause of death might never be determined. The person who put Celeste in that car might never be identified, and that would be another tragedy on top of the first one. Not just that Celeste died, but that no one was held accountable for concealing her body, that her family never got answers, that justice, whatever that means in a case like this, was never served. So where does this leave us? With questions, mostly, and with the uncomfortable reality that sometimes stories don't have neat endings. Sometimes the truth is complicated and unclear and takes months or years to uncover. David Burke made songs in his sister's closet and became famous before he could legally drink. He wrote music that connected with millions of people. He achieved the kind of success most artists only dream about. And then his car became a tomb for a missing teenager, and everything changed. Maybe he's completely innocent. Maybe he's a victim of circumstance, his property used in a crime he knew nothing about. Maybe the investigation will eventually clear him completely, and he'll be able to rebuild his career and his life. Or maybe there's more to the story. Maybe there are connections we don't know about yet. Maybe when all the evidence is analyzed and all the interviews are complete, a different picture will emerge. We don't know. And we might not know for a long time. What we do know is that Celeste Rivas Hernandez is dead, that she spent over a year missing before her body was found, that she ended up in a car that belonged to someone she may or may not have ever met, that someone put her there and walked away, and that somewhere in the gap between her disappearance and her discovery, something terrible happened that took a young life and shattered multiple families. The investigation will continue. Evidence will be analyzed. Tests will come back. Interviews will be conducted. And eventually, maybe, we'll have answers. Until then, all we have is the story as we know it. A teenager who made music on a phone. A girl who went missing. A car that sat abandoned for weeks with a body inside. And questions that don't have answers yet. This case has been covered extensively by mainstream news outlets. The Los Angeles Times, ABC News, NBC News, People Magazine, Billboard, People Magazine, Billboard, and dozens of other publications have reported on it. They've stuck to the confirmed facts. They've noted the unanswered questions. They've been careful not to accuse anyone who hasn't been charged with anything. But that hasn't stopped speculation online. Social media is full of theories and accusations, and people who've decided they know what happened. I started this story by saying it's complicated. and I think that's still the best word for it. It's complicated because we don't have all the information. It's complicated because the facts we do have don't form a clear narrative yet. It's complicated because it involves someone famous, which adds layers of public interest and scrutiny that wouldn't exist otherwise. But mostly, it's complicated because it's real. Real investigations are messy. They take time. They involve waiting for lab results and tracking down witnesses and following leads that go nowhere. They don't resolve in an hour like a TV show. They don't always have satisfying conclusions. Sometimes, a case stays open for months or years. Sometimes, the truth comes out slowly, piece by piece. Sometimes, we never get the whole truth at all. This might be one of those cases, or it might break open tomorrow with an arrest that makes everything clear. We don't know. What we do know is that the story isn't over. The investigation continues. The medical examiner's office continues its work. Detectives continue following leads. And somewhere, someone knows more than they've said. Maybe that person will come forward. Maybe evidence will speak for itself. Maybe time and careful work will eventually reveal what happened to Celeste Rivas Hernandez and why her body ended up in a Tesla registered to a musician who may or may not have had anything to do with her death. Until then, we wait, and we remember that behind every headline is a human story. Behind every investigation is a person who died and people who loved them. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 15 years old. She deserved better than the ending she got, and somewhere out there, someone knows why her story ended the way it did. There's another story waiting in the next video if you want to keep listening. Good night, and thanks for listening.